Welcome back, everyone. Hello, Mr. Harfield. Now, you know the spiel as well as I do. Do you wish to make a very brief opening statement?
No, I do not.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Now, Senator Waters, you have another commitment. So, Senator McKenzie, Senator Waters has to go at 10 o'clock to another committee. So, can we flick across to Senator Waters? Okay.
Hello, folks. Thanks for joining us so late in the evening. It's 10 to 10 at night time. I've got some questions about the Brisbane flight paths, and first of all, I've been told by some Brisbane community members that the Queensland Police have recently checked in on them after they submitted complaints to Airservices about flight noise. Now, I understand there's been over 14,000 complaints to Airservices since July of 2020, so my question is, what's elevated some of those complaints to complaints that Airservices have referred to the police? Anything you can tell me about that, please?
Senator Jason Harfield, Chief Executive Officer, that is news to me. So I'll take that on. It is news to me, so I'll take that on notice.
Okay, yes, thank you. Appreciate any advice you can provide. Do you know how many of those 14,000 complaints were referred to the police?
No, I have no idea. I'll take that on notice.
Okay. And does any, just on a related topic, does any particular volume or nature of complaint trigger any sort of review of flight paths or noise attenuation measures? Is there any sort of volume at which you do a thing?
Not to volume, Senator. All complaints are looked at and reviewed, and where there is the potential of doing noise improvements, then they will be taken and assessed appropriately. Where we've had, in regards to the Brisbane flight paths, we've just recently conducted the post-implementation review, and that has taken on both community engagement, community input, as well as the complaints that have been made over the time, and has formulated the plan going forward.
Okay, can you provide me on notice with as much detail about that as possible? I know the community members probably already know all of that, but it will help me with context. But nonetheless, I've got some specific questions about the sod props, and in particular the increase in overwater flights. I'm interested, on a Quan response, you told me that the number of flights that have flown over the water, over Moreton Bay, has increased when you compare March 2022 to July 2022 with July to November of that same year. But I'm interested in whether it's a proportionate increase or just a sheer number of increase as air flight have picked up after COVID.
I'll ask Mr Curran to answer that.
Thank you, Senator. Pete Curran, Airservices Chief Customer Experience and Strategy Officer. The increase that you referred to in simultaneous opposite direction parallel runway operations sod props in the time frame from, I think it was August 24 of 2022 to November 23 was the information that we provided on our website. I believe that's the information you're referring to. There was approximately a 30% increase on the previous period. During the same time frame, as in from August last year to November last year, there was an increase of around just under 3% of traffic. So there's not a direct correlation in terms of traffic increasing by the same magnitude that we increased the amount of sod props. However, I think we should also understand that that's just at a total level of traffic for the airport, and that you need to go a little deeper into the data to understand actually what happened there. Primarily what we believe happened was that we extended the number of hours that we were making sod props available for, and consequently more aircraft were able to operate over the bay. So it was a good outcome in terms of noise outcomes for the community. It'd be difficult to correlate it to anything other than the extension of hours.
Okay, thank you. And just for clarity's sake, was that an increase in the proportion of flights going over the bay, or just an increase in the sheer numbers of flights?
It is an increase in the proportion of flights going over the bay. Traffic increased only a small amount during that same period.
Okay, all right. Thanks for that clarification. Can I ask, when flights are redirected over water under sod props, whether that's for policy reasons to reduce noise, or whether that's when weather conditions make the overwater flight paths a safer option?
So that we can only operate sod props when weather conditions permit us to do so safely. So that is the opening condition for us to use it. Whenever that's the case, and we can do so, we do so at certain times of the day, and that is namely, I think between it's night time. I think I'm correct to say 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. on a nighttime basis, and we've extended that trial on weekends to go from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. and more recently from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. We also have extended it in the weekends from 8 p.m. until 10 p.m. So whenever weather conditions permit for us to operate safely in those timeframes, we use sod props.
Okay, and so that's the policy reason, is that the weather makes it safe to go over the bay, or are you doing it for noise reduction reasons?
Perhaps I'm not fully understanding the question. The environment must be that we can safely operate over the bay. When those conditions exist in those hours, our preferred mode is to operate over the bay, is the policy to operate over the bay in those hours.
Okay, all right, thank you. Can I ask now about income from levies? I understand that you levy charges to aircrafts operating in our airspace. How much income do you generate from aircraft operating in and out of Brisbane Airport?
Senator Paul Logan, Chief Financial Officer. I don't have the specific numbers for Brisbane. In total, Airservices collects about $1 billion a year across 29 locations. But certainly we can get that information for you.
Okay, yeah, if you could take that on notice for me. Sorry, can you tell me again? $1 billion a year across 19 sites, did you say?
29.
29, okay. And has the introduction of the trial extension of sod props hours, which you've just taken me through, thank you, since Feb, resulted in any reduced levy income to Airservices?
Not that I'm aware of that's related to that, Senator.
Okay, is that something that you might expect, or you wouldn't expect that?
No, we wouldn't expect that to impact, Senator.
Okay. And if you can either provide me right now or perhaps on notice the monthly income generated from aircraft operations at Brisbane Airport since January 2021, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, we certainly can, Senator. Maybe just for context, our charges are levied based on the tonnes landed of the aircraft and per flight. So it's the numbers of flights and the weight of the aircraft that are landed that generate those kinds of levies. The type of operation that's being used coming into an airport don't affect the revenue associated with landings at those airports. So the fact that the aircraft's come in and landed is the basis of the charge rather than the type of operation.
Okay, yep, thank you, that's clear. And lastly, can you please provide me or the committee with a copy of the federal government's 50-year lease agreement with Brisbane Airport Corporation Group?
Senator, we can't provide that. You'd have to seek that either from the department or Brisbane Airport. We don't have any access to that.
Oh, I see, because they've been stonewalling the community for years on that request. Do you have a copy of it?
No, we do not.
Okay.
Minister? Sorry.
Minister, I'm after a copy of the federal government's 50-year lease agreement with the Brisbane Airport Corporation Group.
Oh,
And I was hoping to get a copy of
I'd have to take that on notice.
Thank you.
I certainly don't have it to hand.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Waters. Senator Mackenzie.
Thank you so much, Airservices Australia. What industry guidance is being provided from Airservices Australia to airlines and airspace users to maintain a safe airspace in light of current events abroad?
Senator, can I are you in regard to the shooting down of the balloon over the United States and North America?
Of the spy balloon, yes. And not just in the United States, in Canada, and also additionally 3 unidentified flying objects also being apparent in airspace.
So, Senator, this unidentified or what we would call non-cooperative targets or unauthorised Aerial vehicles is something that we deal with on a regular basis in the sense of have procedures in place, whether it's something that's high altitude, potential balloon, through to an unauthorised drone at lower levels, or a non-authorised access by somebody in an aircraft into another area. This is something that that we've dealt with predominantly and been much more heightened since September 11. We have procedures in place where the vast majority of the country is monitored also by Defence. Our feeds and surveillance is really based on what we would call a cooperative target, and we feed that to Defence. If we become aware, usually for high altitude objects, Defence will become much more aware of it before we do.
So is that 40,000 feet, 20,000
60,000 feet, 70,000 feet, 80,000 feet.
But anything under 60 is yours?
We are managing the airspace from a civil environment, but Defence are also monitoring that airspace as well. If we, for example, hear from a pilot report or whatever, we would then report that to the relevant security agency, and we would then make sure that we're protecting flight away from that object to allow the security agency to determine and do what it has to do with that particular object.
So, Mr Harfield, in response to my question, what industry guidance is being provided from Airservices Australia given the current events abroad?
Nothing's been provided directly resulting of the current events, because it's standard operating procedures to do with unauthorised objects in current airspace today.
When did we last do a simulation of such an event? You mentioned September the 11th, but that was a long time ago.
So we do regular exercises with the military on a regular basis with their defence exercises into the north and various parts of Australia, which deal with unauthorised.
This sort of event and the coordination that would have to be done between agencies. CASA said they hadn't been one in their memory of how long those officers have been part of CASA. When was the last simulation done of this type of event that we've seen overseas?
I'd need to take that on notice.
You've been the Chief Executive Officer for Airservices Australia for how long?
About 7 years, Senator.
Sorry?
7 years, Senator.
7 years. And you've been in senior management of Airservices Australia for how long?
Since 2003, Senator.
Since 2003. And you can't recall a simulation in that time?
I can recall simulations. The
So the
question
last 5 years? 10 years?
My understanding is that we would have done something in the last 5 years around an unauthorised object, but I would take it on notice to give you the specifics.
Okay, thank you. In recent days, evidence suggests we should be vigilant against unmanned and off-radar objects. Have you updated advice or given any warnings for civil aviation in Australian airspace?
No, Senator.
Okay. A week ago, the FAA would have said the likelihood of these events occurring in American or Canadian airspace would have been, extremely remote. We're part of that same defence coordination and strategic military network, and our proximity to the region these objects have originated from suggests we should be, if not as vigilant, more vigilant of something similar to occur. Has your risk assessment changed?
Senator, I'm unaware of our risk assessment change, but I'm also unaware of the discussions that we've been having with the Department of Defence at the operational level, so I can take that on notice.
Take that on notice. And do you have regular conversations with FAA?
Regular in the sense of a normal liaison, yes.
Yes, and has there been any communication with your counterparts in North American airspace around these incidents?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, could you also take that on notice? I now want to turn to the topic that topic around the Brisbane airspace. It was something we covered with the department, which I'm sure you're very, very aware of. Has the temporary consultative committee with the Brisbane community concerned about noise from the Brisbane airport stopped as a result of you handing your report to the Minister? in December?
I'll ask Mr Curran to answer that.
Thank you. Senator, I don't understand the question. The temporary... could you ask the question again? Sorry.
The consultative committee you had with the community affected and impacted. There was a temporary forum.
Yes.
Yes. Is that still in? Is that still running?
Senator, I'm just wanting to understand. You're referring to BAPAF, the Brisbane Airport Post-Implementation Review Advisory
I'm
Forum?
talking about the forum that was set up before you've had, like, whilst you were conducting the PIR.
Yes.
Which has been completed, as I understand. Is the forum still running?
Yeah, thank you, Senator.
Because the department said this morning that it had stopped,
yes,
awaiting the setting up of a permanent consultative committee.
Thank you, Senator. I just wanted to be clear, there's a number of
I'm sure you will have seen the evidence given by the department this morning,
Brisbane,
Mr Curran, or someone in your section should have made you aware of it.
I did, Senator, thank you.
Right.
The Brisbane Airport Post-Implementation Review Advisory Forum that was set up in September of 2021, I believe handed in its final report in December of last year and is no longer stood up in its place, or not in its place, but it continuing by way of a community forum is the BACAG forum, which I believe was also mentioned this morning by the department. Airservices is continuing to engage with that forum, and we are aware that the department are working with the Minister's Office around the establishment of a permanent community noise forum.
So when do you envisage that permanent forum to be stood up?
Senator, I can't answer that question. It's a matter for the department and the Minister's Office. We're not involved in that decision making.
Do you have a suggestion? Do you have any advice for the Minister, given you're getting all the stick?
Senator, I don't think I'm in a position to give advice to the Minister on that, but we can continue to engage with the community through that BACAG forum that I just mentioned and through direct mechanisms which we would normally engage the community with.
When are you next engaging with the BACAG?
BACAG meet quarterly. They have a terms of reference that are independently chaired by, in fact, a member of the former BAPAF group that we just referred to. They have terms of reference that include representatives for all of the ministers, members of the House of Representatives that are immediately adjacent to Brisbane Airport and extends out to 30 kilometres from Brisbane Airport, as well as a range of residents' associations that are typically immediately adjacent to the airport. We meet with that and provide that forum and update on a quarterly basis.
You'd obviously be supportive of any consultative committee that the government set up to address this issue?
Yes, Senator.
And be full participants in that? Yes?
As appropriately determined by the government, yes.
Why did Airservices only provide a workshop on the implementation review after Henry Pike, the member for Bowman, which covers Redland City, requested it, despite the fact that the proposed changes to flight paths over Redlands were a significant aspect of the review?
Senator, I have to take the specifics of that question on notice. I am aware of a number of meetings with residents in the Redland Shire as well as with the member for Bowman. The exact timing of that I would have to take on notice.
When was the workshop?
We had a number of workshops, Senator. We did...
Just let me know the dates.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Yep, we did workshops associated with the post-implementation review terms of reference in late 2021, and then we undertook 9 post-implementation review workshops in September 2022. There was also a series of workshops that were undertaken by an entity called Trax International that were contracted as an independent consultant to review the post-implementation review, and they undertook a range of community workshops during July of 2022 also.
Was there any consultation with Bayside residents of Redlands prior to SODPROP's trial being implemented?
Senator, I think the answer to that may be no, and I would need to take that on notice to confirm though, but I believe the answer is no.
I'd like to know why.
and as I say, I believe the answer is no. I would need to take that on notice. I understand that part of the engagement with the community was initially focused around the areas that were immediately impacted with the implementation of the new flight paths in Brisbane. And as the post-implementation review proposal evolved and additional work on sod props over the bay operations became an option, the implications for broader Brisbane residents, as in Redland residents, which are further afield, became apparent, and we then subsequently undertook engagement.
Thank you. I'll have more questions on notice on that. I have some questions to put to you from the Brisbane Flight Path Community Alliance. Is there a sense within Airservices Australia that certain Brisbane communities, inner city Brisbane communities, should be perform a buffering capacity for the rest of the East Coast at expense of their amenity, livability, health and wellbeing?
No, Senator.
That is not the view of Airservices Australia?
No, it is not.
Do you accept that that is the perspective of the community that is suffering from the impact of this air path noise?
Yes, I do, Senator.
And are the solutions all in the PIR?
Working through and balancing all with the community, etc. The post-implementation review is to take that into account and the noise action plan as a result.
And is obviously community consultation is an important part of that.
Correct.
You're prepared to meet with the community.
Yes.
It seems the minister isn't. Did you know that?
I am aware that the Minister advised that she was not meeting with members of the community.
Assistant Minister, do you think that's acceptable community consultation from the Minister? You've been sitting here listening to not just the Coalition but the Greens put forward the impact of these flight paths on these affected communities. Do you think as a responsible Minister should actually meet with the community?
The government is and understands the angst caused by airport developments in Brisbane, and as has been discussed earlier and just here a few minutes ago, we're in the later stages of forming a permanent community noise consultation body, and that will be formed in the coming months. More details.
What precisely does Airservices mean by, and they quote, the management of community and political responses? Please provide some candid and frank examples to illustrate this. And I'm assuming they're quoting from, directly from Airservices Australia communication or the report.
Senator, I'm not familiar with the quote. I would have to take that on
All right,
notice.
I will go back and ask for further details on that, but I would appreciate when I do on notice some frank and candid examples. The document says, and they quote, as evidence both internationally and within Australia, increased public pressure has resulted in operational restrictions at various airports. Yet this is, and close quote, yet this is exactly what Brisbane communities want Airservices to do: implement net movement reductions, which brings about actual noise reductions. How does Airservices reconcile its industry key messages with Airservices' own community engagement framework, which promises meaningful, transparent engagement with community?
Senator, in terms of striking that balance between community and industry outcomes, and I think your reference there was specifically in relation to, was it suppression of demand? Was that
Yep.
It is the case when a master development plan, or sorry, a major development proposal such as has gone through for the Brisbane new parallel runway, that there's a forecast that's submitted as a part of that process for the growth, which is obviously linked to the necessity for the investment in the additional runway. That forecast is something that Airservices is, I beg your pardon, that forecast is a part of the process that's submitted through and approved by the relevant minister or ministers. And then Airservices is latterly engaged in the process of designing airspace to accommodate that forecast growth. it wouldn't be for Airservices to intervene after there's been an approval from the appropriate ministers to suppress that growth. What we try to do and seek to do is to design airspace and flight paths that minimise the impact on communities and the environment to accommodate that growth.
Well, this community alliance feels that Airservices has lied to the Brisbane community previously. They believe the behaviour's been unethical. They're wanting to know, they feel the behaviour that put them in this situation is being repeated. Again, this is direct responses from them. What would you say to these community members and this alliance if they were before you and putting their claims that Airservices Australia has found yet again to be blatantly lying to communities around, again, the parallel runway, etc., and the conversations you were having with community back then and seem to still be having? I think part of the issue relates to the obligations under the Airservices Act to protect communities from the effects and association with the operation and use of aircraft.
Senator,
now, I notice you're nodding, so I would really appreciate your response.
Senator, thank you. This is the Brisbane Flight Path Community Alliance, you're referring to, BFPCA. Yes. So we have engaged with the chair and previous chairs of the BFPCA since its inception. I beg your pardon, I seem to be losing the microphone. Since its inception, the previous chair was Mr David Diamond, and our head of community engagement had a number of face-to-face meetings as well as email telephone exchanges with the chair of BFPCA to do primarily three things: understand BFPCA's perspective, try to better explain the process Airservices was going through, and to establish an arrangement, if you will, whereby they would communicate to their members around key workshops and releases of information which Airservices was placing on our website from time to time.
The talking points.
No, I'm talking about, for example, the last contact that we had with the now current chair, Mr Marcus Foth of BFPCA, was on the 12th of December via a text exchange to notify the chair of BFPCA that we were putting the post-implementation review report live on our website with the intent that they would then engage with their members to keep them abreast of that update. We've tried to engage with them to have a constructive dialogue. I think it's also important to add that it's not the case that there's a single view from communities and community groups across Brisbane by any stretch of the imagination. There's a number of groups, from BFPCA to a recently formed group, the Redlanders Against Diversions and Amenity Reductions, RADAR, another group, the Sanford Area Aircraft Action Group. They all have differing views, and Airservices is, through its consultation, trying to understand those views, trying to understand how we can better balance those with our obligations around community, industry and environment.
I just want to go to a Quan follow-up from October, November, marketing, promotion and communication for workshops. The question asked for the expenditure and copies of all advertisements around the workshops. You said you had several in Redlands in September, was it?
Workshops?
Anyway, irrespective of the month they were held, the answer confirms that zero budget was spent on advertising the PIR workshops, and instead Airservices relied on the community to spread the information via word of mouth. Why didn't Airservices Australia deem it necessary to spend substantial money on PR communication to, if you like, get the community out and engaged?
Senator, the approach that we took was really fivefold. And if it's appropriate, I'll run through a very high level of what the five key pillars of that approach was, and then perhaps into more detail as you wish. But the engagement strategy broadly rested around a number of undertakings that Airservices did itself via our Engage website and via engaging traditional media through interviews and the like, which we did not have to pay for. The second part of the community engagement was obviously, I beg your pardon, Airservices also undertook a range of workshops, etc. We also then had the Tracks International consultation process, where they engaged the community through a series of workshops, which I touched on earlier tonight. The third part of community engagement was that BACAG group that I mentioned before, which is a long-established frame that already has linkages into a range of communities within 30 kilometres of the Brisbane airport through elected officials at state, city council and federal level. The third one was the BAPAF frame, which was an important body that was established, as I think you're aware, to inform the Airservices PIR, and part of its terms of reference were in fact directly to offer a broad Brisbane community perspective on aircraft noise and our post-implementation review. We met with BAPAF on 8 occasions to seek to understand what they were learning through their engagement with the Brisbane community. They published their reports on a quarterly basis on the Department of Infrastructure's website. And for example, I think it was in the first report, they had more than 365 submissions from community members. So we got a very strong input there from BAPAF. And the final one was engaging directly with these community groups and associations, as I've just touched on, whether that's the Pink and Bar Residents Association or BFPCA or the group in Sanford. And so we were able to tried to work with some of those community groups to get the message out around our workshops and around key moments as we went through the post-implementation review.
You might have saved a few bucks, Mr. Curran. Would you do anything different now, knowing what you know now?
Senator, I think there are definitely aspects that we can take learnings from this.
And what would they be?
Well, Senator, more broadly, I think that we would probably set about the third-party assurance frame earlier on in the process. The use of Tracks International was something that we consistently got positive feedback from community. I think it's fair to say Airservices had a trust deficit with the community at the commencement of the post-implementation review. That third-party assurance model was extremely helpful. We got that feedback directly from the community. We got it from BAPAF. We also got it from other stakeholders as we engaged them. It's probably a key point. Another element would be our flight path design principles, perhaps to place those more at the forefront of some of the dialogue that we had with community groups.
So better consultation?
Senator, I think we did extensive consultation.
So no regrets? I'm not understanding, Mr. Curran. Like, I get all the emails I'm sure Minister King gets.
Yep.
And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of residents extremely concerned, health and wellbeing, a whole raft of issues, not to mention, feeling like they've been excluded from a government process. I'm still unclear after listening to your evidence whether you got it right, no regrets, or whether you would actually do something different when it comes to dealing with these community members who have legitimate concerns.
Senator, I think one of the challenges with community engagement, we find it in Brisbane, we find it in every other location that we deal with, is the outcomes of it are very subjective. And so it's always the case that there will be some in the community who view the activities favourably and others who will view them less favourably. I think that broadly we got it right. The consultation has been extensive, and the use of those 5 points to support and augment our consultation has been extremely helpful in informing what is now a very robust post-implementation review and a thorough noise action plan for how we can invest in improvements in Brisbane over the next 1, 2, 3 years.
Mr. Harfield, have you learnt anything for the organisation to consult better with communities from this affair?
Yes, Senator, and one of the things that we are undertaking as a result of the Brisbane new parallel runway and even the post-invitation review is we're about to start consultation on a community consultation standard, so that everyone can be understand of what can be expected and what not, and we'll go through that and have that worked through the community, and we'll use that as the standard that we'll be judged by.
Much better. I've got a year-to-year comparison of Brisbane aircraft noise complaint data, which has seen complaints skyrocket over the Labor Party's first 5 months in government. Can you confirm those numbers?
Those numbers are correct because they come from a question on notice. Senator, I've got something here to table which takes the complaints month by month from the start of the Brisbane parallel runway all through to January, as well as the number of complainants per month, as well as the number of movements per month.
Thank you.
Because with the, and if I could table that, and I've made some copies.
Is there a policy internally to deal with repeat complainants?
I
know some Senate committees have processes to deal with when we get form letters, which is, 3,000 submissions, but 2,500 of them were the same letter from a generated website. Do you have an internal policy to deal with repeat complainants?
I'll have Mr. Curran may be able to give a bit more detail, but normally if it is the same complaint repeated by the same complainant, we will treat that as one complaint rather than if it's 10 of the same thing over and over again, it will be treated as one complaint.
Because they're still being woken up at 5 a.m. when the baby's awake and the dog's barking.
But if it's something different, we'll take that as a separate complaint.
Right.
But we track them all, so in other words...
On notice, I would like to understand of the complaints with the numbers we've got in front of us, how many are your repeat complainants versus individual complaints?
Different new ones. Yeah.
Because that would tend to suggest to me there is a lot more complaints than what's actually being reported. If we were going to take the time it took somebody to pick up the phone or write the email, just because it's from the same person about noise, shouldn't actually disqualify it from being counted as a complaint.
Senator, we can certainly take that on notice. Perhaps just to clarify, if I may, the only time we wouldn't count the complaint as an additional complaint if it was about the very same flight, to call and complain about the same flight again, perhaps
Next
immediately
day.
thereafter. Then that is not.
Or 6 months later. I appreciate that. Thank you. If you could take that on notice. I now have some questions.
Sorry, Senator, on this subject,
Yep.
while we're still on Brisbane,
Yep.
I know Senator White, who has spent an amazing amount of time around airports and aviation, has got a couple of questions.
So just on that, can you break that, following up from Senator Mackenzie's question, actually how many individual complainants there were for each of those those years that you've broken down on the document that you've tabled, and how many complaints they made each?
We can provide that. I'm not sure whether we can just do it off the top, but we could provide that extra information.
So there might be
on
one
those.
person who's made 1,000 complaints, for example.
Yeah.
There could be.
Right. So, and that's what I'm interested in. So, who's at the top of the level, and how many individuals? So,
Well,
when
we
you
break
look at
down the number of complaints and the number of individual different
complainants and
complainants.
how many they've made. Like, you don't have to do 50 who've made one complaint, but it'll be interested to see what the spread of it is, and there could be somebody who has made 1,000 complaints, I would expect, potentially. And can I also ask you, just in relation to those complaints, are they associated with any particular time of day? I mean, Senator Mackenzie suggested 5 a.m, but can you break down what they're complaining about? Like, are they talking about after midnight, or are they talking, say, at 8 p.m? What are they apply
I
to
don't know if you
that.
can do the spread.
Yeah, Senator, I couldn't give you detail of the annual data that we have now, but we certainly do have that information. We can provide that on notice by night time. There's a lot of seasonality to it as well. We typically see
Where the
more,
wind blows too.
exactly. We typically see more complaints around arrivals rather than departures. And at certain times of year, when we see a change in that seasonality, we'll see a change in the way we use the runways, and therefore a change in noise patterns, and therefore a change in complaint behaviour.
So this is not something that's unfamiliar to you, because the same sort of things happened at Sydney Airport, didn't they?
Melbourne, Perth.
Correct. It is.
As we
We
know,
see the
Mr.
same
Harper.
around the country, different aerodromes and other
And just on
jurisdictions.
that community groups, the community groups, are you going to include workers who work at the airport? Are they in the interest groups, out of interest?
Geez, that's a curveball.
I know, yeah. Who knew I worked for a union once?
Senator, the engagements that we've had have been around groups that have been active in the noise space, and so typically that may have employees from a range of spaces, but we haven't had specific dialogue along lines for people who work at the airport necessarily, Senator.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator White. Senator McKenzie, I'll come back to you, but we do have 3 more agencies in the next half hour. So
Thank
Your
you. Thank you so much. Just wondering if you've recently engaged a consultant to assist with advertising.
Senator, you've more information?
Okay, I've asked other agencies in the department, what's your line item spend on consultants?
Paul, you got that?
On consultants or on advertising?
On
Senator?
consultants.
On consultants for financial year
Today.
22-23, about $10.8 million.
$10.8 million. On what?
On what? On a range of subjects, Senator.
Right. Tell me.
So ranging from business sustainment programs as we worked our way through COVID.
No, that was this financial year.
In some cases this financial year, yes, Senator.
I thought the $10 million was for this financial year.
I'm just trying to split it up into
Sorry,
those.
Mr. Logan, can I have clarity? When you answered my question, you said for this financial year to date, you spent over $10 million on consultants.
$8 million.
8?
10.8.
$10.8 million this financial year.
Yes, Senator.
And it's on responding to COVID.
No, Senator, I'm just trying to work out the breakdown. So in some cases it is our continuing response to COVID in terms of our ongoing restructuring of the organisation as we're working, continuing to restructure the organisation. So in some cases it's included an enabling services transformation where we're restructuring the back office of the organisation, and we're working through the implementation of a new enterprise resource planning tool. In other cases, we've had consultants working with us on information management, which is more on the front end of the operational side of the organisation.
All right, in the interest of time, on notice, I'll ask you to break all of that $10.8 million down, please.
Sure.
I'd also like to know how long you've been working on your restructure and when you want to see that complete. Have you spent any money on advertising?
Just give me a moment, Senator. So we would have spent money on advertising related to our recruitment activities, Senator. I don't have the specifics on it. We spent this financial year about $346,000 on a range of activities that run. I don't have the details specifically, Senator, but we can provide them on notice.
Okay. Were any of it, how much did it cost you to do the Connecting Australians to What Matters to Them campaign?
I'd need to get that specifically, Senator. I don't have that broken out.
Mr Curran?
Senator, I'm not
Do you
familiar with
know
that.
about this campaign, Mr Harfield?
I do know about the campaign.
Okay. How much did it cost?
I don't know how much it cost. We'll get that onto you on our notice.
So tell us very quickly why Airservices Australia felt they needed to do a campaign around connecting Australians to what matters to them.
The reason that we battled it is that fostering the growth and understanding and coming out of COVID, what it was that actually matters as we continue to prepare for the continued growth that's occurring. The fact that one of the things is that there is a want for people to travel, and we've got to make sure that we're in front to respond to that, Senator. There is an upside to aviation, not just the downside of just aircraft noise.
Isn't that the responsibility of the airlines themselves? Why is that Airservices Australia's responsibility?
The airlines will look at it specifically for their particular reason, but our obligation is to all airspace. One of our requirements under our Act, our actual second function, is to foster and promote civil aviation inside and outside Australia.
So this was a survey though, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. To give us an indication.
Where was this campaign run?
It was run across a number of locations. We'll give you exactly where the spread of the 1,000 people that were interviewed or surveyed.
How did they access the survey?
I have to take that on notice.
Mr Curran or Mr Logan?
Senator, I'm unable to add any more.
I understand. I can tell you what people wanted at post-COVID. They wanted their luggage to arrive with them when they did, and they wanted their planes to leave on time and land on time. I'm not sure. Can people who signed up to this, and my understanding is that it was predominantly in certain newspapers and online news outlets, can people be very confident about the data? What did you do with the data of people who actually did the survey?
I have to take that on notice, Senator, but it would be kept confidential.
You won't have sold it to a third party?
No, Senator.
De-identified?
Not even de-identified.
Okay, excellent. If you could answer those questions on notice, I would appreciate it. And just finally, some questions on your board. Are you able to confirm that the quorum for your board is 5 members?
Yes, Senator.
Have there been any meetings of the board where quorum has not been able to be achieved?
No, Senator.
Not even due to conflicts of interest?
No, Senator.
Are there any vacancies?
There is one vacancy.
How long has that been vacant?
Since December.
December. Has Airservices Australia provided the Minister with skills matrix and appropriate names?
We've traditionally and in the process of the current vacancy, but previously we've provided skill matrix and potential recommendations.
So if the board, was it a snap resignation?
Term expiry, Senator.
Term expired, so you knew it was coming?
Correct.
So when did you send the information to the department or the minister?
We would have requested that before.
Absolutely. How
Yes.
long before? What is your
I have to
typical
take that on
process?
notice because
Mr Curran knows. He's the one that's probably had to say to someone, get that brief up.
Senator, unfortunately, I
You
don't.
don't know? Is it a couple of months?
I'd have to take it on notice because it would be normally handled through the chair.
Okay. I'd appreciate that. And have you heard back from the minister on the appointment?
Not the vacancy as yet, Senator.
Okay. When do you anticipate that to happen?
At the minister's pleasure.
Of course. So I understood there were 2 vacancies. Have you recently filled one?
Correct.
Can you just...
The previous incumbent, Anne Brown, was reappointed.
Okay. Right. And did the minister approve that reappointment?
Yes, Senator.
When did she approve that?
Earlier this month, last month, we'll be in January.
In January. And did her term expire at the same time as...
Correct. So we had a gap of a few weeks.
Right. But so the brief that you're going to get back to me on notice would have had both terms expiring,
Correct.
and the other person didn't want to be reappointed.
That's not my understanding, Senator.
So they did want to be reappointed,
My understanding was they were.
but only Ms Brown got reappointed by the new staff.
That's correct.
Righto, more to go with this one as well. Just on the spy balloons, are you confident that we have tracking technology that would be able to locate such an object in our airspace?
Senator, is a question for the Department of Defence.
Don't you have radars?
Yes, we do, but it's based around civil air traffic, which are designed to have cooperative targets that want to be seen.
That tell you that we're over
Correct.
here?
And so,
But these, in the case of the North American incidents, we're at 20,000 and 40,000 feet. Does
And
Defence
higher.
operate that? Do you know what I mean? Like,
no. So yes, we manage the airspace, but they have, even though we are managing the airspace, they have a range of surveillance techniques that monitors our national security and monitors all of our airspace. Yet we are managing the air traffic within it.
no, I get it. It's just from evidence we heard from CASA. So it's really Defence is the only one that would be able to would know if there was such an object in our airspace.
They are most likely to identify it unless it was reported to us. They would most
Unless
likely, in
someone
monitoring the visit there of what we would call an uncooperative target that wasn't wanting to be seen.
Thank you.
Chair, I know Michael Tom's got some quick questions on the radar at the Rockhampton Mackay airports. Have you seen the reports?
Yes, I have, Senator.
Okay, so the reports are that it's some unnamed officials, mindful of that, said it was second-rate radar and that there has been 221 incidents since July last year of aircraft dropping off the radars on approach to Rockhampton on Mackay. I'm particularly interested to know whether or not ASDSB equipment will be installed at these airports soon, and if not, why not?
Senator, I need to go back to the initial statement, is that the report that was in the Australian is incorrect. There are...
Shock. My God, Murdoch did something.
Well, hang on, I'm not always going to... I'm interested in the explanation here, because this is... in fact, it's not a report from the Australian, it's admittedly an unnamed official person, but...
Correct, but I just want to go, that was reported in the Australian. So prior to July last year, the airspace around Rockhampton and Mackay was controlled from the tower without the use of any radar.
Right.
So it was done what we would call procedurally. Although that they could get some sort of situational awareness, it was actually managed without the radar, even though we had radar coverage there. In July, we transitioned not only Rockhampton and Mackay, but we also did it to Launceston and Hobart, where we were utilising the radar and managed from either Brisbane Centre or Melbourne Centre, as we do for, same with Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, and start running like we would a capital city aerodrome. In going to utilising the radar is that radar is a line of sight technology and not always can see around mountains. But what it did was a safety enhancement, because we were able to use the safety alerts that are utilised within our air traffic control system in our centres. For example, one of the safety alerts were introduced, which wasn't existing before July, was what we would call the minimum safe altitude warning, where the system would alert if the pilot went below the lower safe altitude terrain, which did not exist prior to July. The reports that are mentioned are our request. So when we put it in and we're starting to utilise radar for the first time, radar is required to be tuned. And so we wanted reports from the controllers where they saw aeroplanes drop out or there were holes in the coverage. Now, prior to July, they were being separated without the use of radar, and they are continuing to do so today, even if there is radar coverage and there's a dropout. So there is no issue to safety. The reason we wanted to do that is so we could tune the radar. On the 3rd and 4th of March, coming up in a couple of weeks, our techs are going up to the Mount Almo radar, where they will tune, and some of these holes will disappear as a result of retuning the radar. In conjunction with that, we are supplementing with introducing ADSB and continuing that in coverage, and in further that, because both radar and even ADSB being terrestrial type technologies, you might have seen recently is Skycraft, a company that's a spin-off from the University of New South Wales, put up their first satellite as a proof of concept, which we are starting to utilise for exploring that ADSB as well as communications are coming from satellite, which means we don't get holes anymore because it's looking down. So we're continuing trying to enhance safety, Senator, and that's the background.
Right. So apparently this article is saying air traffic controllers are claiming that Airservices Australia is balking at the cost of installing a new TAR system and blame that for the delays in the ADSB as well. You're
That is not
rejecting
correct.
that? You say those air traffic controllers are wrong? Have you spoken to air traffic controllers yourself?
Yeah, speak to them all the time, but nothing specific. This is the first this has been raised.
They have not raised that with you?
Correct.
Okay. There was a report in the Australian that at least one shift manager had been asked to stop submitting safety reports. Have you investigated whether that is true?
That I have investigated that. What was asked was that, similar to what Senator Mackenzie said about sub-complaints, that when we've identified a particular gap in the radar coverage, there's no point continuing to report on that time and time again because we've got an action in place to put anything new or something that we have not already got registered. Happy to take on the report, but there's no point continuing to report on the same issue when we've got something that's being done.
And when will the ADSB system be installed in Rockhampton and Macquarie?
So there is some ADSB already in place, and so we're making sure that feed comes into the system, and additional sites will come online early next year.
Okay. And you might also want to brief the department they didn't have any idea that this was even reported, which shocked me given the nature of this article, and you'd think people in the aviation policy team would be monitoring the media for these sort of stories. But thank you very much for your information, Mr Harfield. It's very helpful. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr Harfield, to your officers. It is a terribly damning headline when you read that. So that's good. Thank you very much for clearing that up for us. Yep. So, Mr Harfield, we'll let you run away, and Mr Cogran and Mr Logan.